know, it goes without saying that every company wants a good reputation. But a lot of companies may not be aware that research has been done over the past few decades showing the actual value, monetary value of having a good reputation, of being liked, and also how that relates to other external functions. In this year's Public Affairs Pulse survey, we look specifically at how public opinion and reputation affects public affairs. First of all, a few words about the value of reputation. We all think we know that having a good reputation makes a positive difference, but we have a hard time quantifying it. Well, academic researchers over the last 10 years have taken a number of steps to do so. One of the things that they found in looking at the S&P 500 and all of their tangible and intangible assets, they found that tangible assets like your plants and equipment and investments are actually less valuable than your intangible assets. Your intangible assets are primarily your corporate reputation. Where it really pays off is when you're merging with another company and people are not opposed to the idea because they like you, or you're moving a facility into a new city or a new country and people once again have heard good things about you, or they've had a good experience with your organization and they welcome you to their neighborhood. So that's what it means to be an intangible asset. The second area where reputation shows real value is in actual financial performance. Studies have been done that show that over a 5-year period of time, every single financial metric shows that a company with a stronger reputation will perform better financially than one with a worse reputation. And I think the most positive way, the third point I want to mention about the value of reputation, is that when people like you, they ascribe other positive traits to you as a company. Now, this happens to us as individuals all the time. We meet somebody we kind of like, we find them attractive, we find them intelligent. We're also more likely to say they're also kind, they're probably generous, they're probably a good friend to their good friends. We do the same things with companies. We meet a company, their customer service is first rate, and we say, you know, their products are probably good. In reality, that's exactly what happens. When people are told about a company they like and asked to judge the quality of their products and services, they tend to say those are first rate as well. So this gives you a taste of how the human mind works related to reputation and how the public tends to respond positively to an organization who is well thought of. Obviously, it's going to have impacts on public affairs as well, and this is where public opinion can really relate to public affairs. But not a lot of research has been done on this subject until now. This year's Public Affairs Pulse survey looks specifically at several areas where reputation directly affects your effectiveness in public affairs. One of them I think is really important to note, and that's how trustworthiness relates to the level of regulation the public is supportive of. So first we asked 2,000 Americans to look at 9 different industry sectors and rate them against each other in terms of trustworthiness. And then we asked them to look at the same sectors and rate them in terms of whether they have too much regulation, just the right amount, or not enough. And there was a very strong correlation between companies who were considered trustworthy and those companies who were considered to have either just the right amount of regulation or perhaps even too much. And at the other side of the coin, we found that sectors that were considered less trustworthy than average were more likely to be viewed as being underregulated. Now, those industries that were considered high trust and perhaps with just the right amount of regulation are technology and manufacturing, and to some degree also retail. Those at the bottom of the pile, unfortunately, were pharmaceutical companies, health insurance companies, and banks. The rest of the sectors were somewhere in the middle. So once again, we do see almost a one-to-one correlation between the lack of trust in a sector and the willingness to regulate that sector. So that's clearly a big impact of public opinion on public affairs. A second area where I think it really matters is on how the public view individual players in business and politics and in government relations. Now, it goes without saying once again that the public is cynical about politicians in Washington. And in fact, in our survey, less than 10% of the public believe that Washington politicians have high levels of honesty and ethics. Well, you know what? CEOs didn't look much better than elected politicians. Their scores were slightly better, but still fewer than 10% of Americans believe that big company CEOs have high levels of honesty and ethics. So given the poor reputation of CEOs and Washington politicians, why should we be surprised that when a business commission is formed to advise the President of the United States on policy, that the public is cynical about it. After all, if Washington politicians are going behind closed doors with big company CEOs, they just might be up to no good. So there is actually a fair amount of public concern and consternation about corporate executives serving on these commissions. And it's not unique to the Trump administration. We asked a similar question a few years ago when Obama was president, and more than half of respondents said they did not like the idea of CEOs serving on presidential commissions. This year we asked some very specific questions about this issue, and I think you're going to want to read the poll survey to see those responses. First of all, I would argue that probably 95% of corporate CEOs who are invited to advise the president on policy do so because they want to serve their country, or at the very least they feel that their expertise is such that they can make a really positive difference to society. However, 1 out of 3 Americans believes that the reason corporate CEOs volunteer to serve on these commissions is to increase their corporate profits. And another 9% say they do so just to try to become more popular. So I'm not saying that CEOs shouldn't serve on government commissions, but they need to do it with their eyes open. You need to have an internal and external stakeholder communication strategy to explain why you're doing it, what your employees expect to get out of it, your efforts to really serve your country and make a positive difference if you're going to volunteer for that type of public-private advisory organization. And the third and final area I want to mention and how reputation and public affairs go together kind of works in reverse order, where I start with government affairs. We all know the terms lobbying and lobbyist have just become pejorative. They clearly have bad reputations in the popular vernacular. There is no amount of money you could spend on advertising or public relations to completely change the public's opinion of lobbying and lobbyist, even though the right to petition government for the redress of grievances is actually one of the freedoms mentioned in the First Amendment. It really doesn't matter to most people. They're used to being cynical about Washington politicians, politics itself, as well as lobbying and lobbyists. However, we found that when companies are specific and give a good reason for that helps their business and society for lobbying, the public is not only okay with it, they think it's a good thing. So, for example, over 60% of Americans believe that it's perfectly fine and acceptable for companies to lobby to try to create jobs. Majorities also believe it's acceptable for companies to lobby to level the playing field with competitors, which I think the public feels there'll be a benefit to that, of having a more fair and just competitive marketplace. And thirdly, and this has received a lot of media attention in the last year or two, a majority of Americans believe that it's perfectly acceptable for companies to lobby to support social causes. So the lesson there is, I think this is what a lot of good business and political communicators are aware of, is that when an organization is specific about what it's doing and why, what the business reason is, and what the public benefit is, people will be more supportive. So to tie things up here, I'm of the belief that people working with government and in public affairs have a lot to learn from the communications function within their organizations about the power of having a strong reputation.